Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting Poland, and from there he goes to Ukraine. Now, an Indian Prime Minister has never visited the independent nation of Ukraine. And for many Indians, Ukraine is all about the war with Russia. But the relationship between the two countries dates back to the Soviet Union. The Russia-Ukraine war has impacted several areas of cooperation between the two countries: economy, education, and of course, military ties. Critical Indian defense equipment was made in Ukraine during the times of the Soviet Union. That dependence continues as those factories still make the spares for our transport aircraft, for our warships. These include the gas turbine engines for 16 of the Indian Navy's frontline warships and over 100 AN-32 transport aircraft operated by the Indian Air Force. Now, there are reports that Ukraine's state-owned Zorya is in talks with the Indian private sector companies to jointly manufacture gas turbines used by warships. The two countries are also discussing manufacturing aircraft and aero engines in India. Now, what is the import of these talks between India and Ukraine, and more importantly, why is Prime Minister Modi visiting Ukraine when it's literally at war with Russia? Joining me to discuss this are Major General Dhruv Katoch of the India Foundation and my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul in the studio with us. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. General Katoch, I want to start by asking you this: why is Prime Minister Modi visiting a war zone? Ukraine is literally fighting a war with Russia. It's just launched a drone attack on Russia today. It's taken territory in the Kursk region of Russia. At a time like this, what is Prime Minister Modi doing in Kiev, where he will be in the next couple of hours?
Sandeep, I think it's a very high-risk mission. Even earlier, the British Prime Minister had gone to Ukraine, and even at that time, I thought it was a very high-risk mission to visit a country which is at war. That notwithstanding, I presume the appropriate security measures will be taken by the host country, as also I think the Russians will be aware of the program, and they will be circumspect in what they do. But in my view, the reason why this is taking place now, I think we are having both Russia and Ukraine come to a stage by which they are getting exhausted in the third year of the war which they are fighting.
Right.
When I look at it from the Ukraine's point of view, they are very concerned as to what is going to happen in the next US presidency, because should Donald Trump come in power,
Right.
he will cut off all financial aid to Ukraine, which will effectively bring the war to a close. The Europeans cannot fight it on their own.
Right.
From the Russian side, I think there are also concerns because it has been a strain on the Russian economy,
Yes.
and both sides I think are now looking at closure. But it has to be a respectable closure.
Right.
And I think that is where the nub of it lies. India is not in a position to actually force either of the countries. Why India? I think the world is not in a position to
Yes.
force either of the countries to a negotiating table.
Right.
But if you have an honest broker, like India is
Yes.
an acceptable face to both Russia and to Ukraine. India is also an acceptable face to the United States and NATO. So I think when you're looking into that, with the Prime Minister's relationship with the President Putin,
Yes.
and he has also met President Zelensky, I think they have some element of faith in him that at least here is a person who is not going to sell us down the drain, to put it very, very bluntly.
Right.
So whether it leads to peace or not, I think
Yes.
that opportunity is there. And I think that is one of the major reason why the Indian Prime Minister is going there is to seize that opportunity. Of course, while doing so, there'll be other things also on the discussion table.
Right.
But I think this is going to be the prime reason why he's been there. He's already been to Russia, and now
Right.
this is the visit to Ukraine.
It sounds like a bit of a balancing act, General Katoch, that, a few weeks
Yes.
back, Prime Minister Modi was in Russia. The West, of course, frowned on that visit. And now a few weeks later, he's in Ukraine, where he's possibly going to be hugging, President Zelensky. But Aditya, tell us this. I was reminded of what Dr. Jaishankar said last year, where he said that Europe's problems are not the world's problems.
Absolutely.
Right? And today you have Prime Minister Modi in two of the most important European countries. First he goes to Poland and then he goes to Ukraine. What is the timing of this visit? What does it kind of indicate? Do you think it's more about seizing opportunities that General Katoch mentioned that are opening up there? Or is it possibly India playing an honest broker between Russia and Ukraine? It's friends with both countries, it has interests with both countries, and therefore it's seen as a reliable partner. What's the inside talk on this visit?
You know, Sandeep, one thing that puts India apart completely, very different from most of the countries, there are a couple of things. One is the Indian diplomacy.
Right.
What Jaishankar said, what Hardeep Singh Puri and others have reflected in the government, time and again, not just in European platforms, but interviews and spoken in New Delhi as well, and said that, you know, you can't preach us.
Right.
You can't continue to preach us because we will show you the mirror.
Yes.
And that's what Government of India has done
It's
over the last 3 years.
Self-interest. It's
Self-interest.
more interest.
If
India's
America, if the
self-interest,
Western countries can look inwards and perhaps see that over the last few decades, their policy has been America first, you know, Europe first, then why can't we look the same way, look at our priorities, India first, our independent sovereign, you know, policies and priorities would remain the major focus.
Absolutely.
And secondly, of course, India's positioning since the beginning of the war has been that this is not an era of war. Two, now Modi visiting Moscow last month and saying that solutions cannot be found in a battlefield.
Absolutely.
This is incredible. You know, we haven't seen India touch such a staunch you know, independent positioning and say to the world that no, we are not going to join one axis against the other. We have great traditional historical ties with Russia. We've been good in relationship with Ukraine. You're right that in last more than 30 years, this is the first visit of an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine. After 45 years, after Morarji Desai, Prime Minister Narendra Modi for the first time visiting Poland. It's a huge message. Like, I mean, remember the time 2.5 years ago when Indians were stranded there. And 23,000 of them were rescued as part of Operation Ganga. And so India has played a significant role. India, you know, although many people do not believe it and there is, you know, there are jokes doing around, but India did speak to, both Modi and Jaishankar spoke to Putin and Zelensky and said that our people are trapped. We need to rescue them. You need to have a humanitarian pause. And that's how in Kharkiv, there was a humanitarian pause and people were brought in and rescued. So now it comes at a time when, as rightly put by General Katoch, there's this fatigue. There is an exhaustion now. And they are looking in the next 6 months or so that there should be some closure, there should be an end to a war, but both sides are reluctant to concede and want some kind of a respectable closure. So can India play that predominant role of a leader in this age? Because you saw a G20 consensus also being arrived last year. So why not? Prime Minister Modi certainly will you know, put out such messages both from Poland and Ukraine. And many would say that this is a balancing act. That may be fair, that's okay. I mean, India wants peace at the end of the day, even if at the, you know, question of a balancing act.
Yes, absolutely. And now it's not an era of war, as the Prime Minister said, but you know, it's also about India first, and that's been the consistent policy of this government in the last couple of years. But apart from the India first policy, there's also an armed forces first policy that India would be keen to pursue when it comes to Russia and the former Soviet bloc countries. And Ukraine is very critical, as I mentioned, for reasons of equipment that have been sourced historically from the regions of Ukraine, which manufactured aircraft engines and warship engines. And General Katoch, you know, Ukraine has also been a very key defense supplier to New Delhi. First, I mean, because of the legacy platforms that we've operated from the time of the Soviet Union. You have the AN-32s, 105 of them that were bought from Ukraine. They're literally the workhorse of the Air Force. And we were doing the math today. It's 16 frontline warships of the Indian Navy. That's literally 90% of the Indian Navy's warship fleet are driven by Ukrainian gas turbine engines. Now, how critical is this for two of our three armed forces? The fact that you have such a large number of platforms that come from Ukrainian defense companies. How important will this be when the Prime Minister begins his talks with President Zelensky?
Well, I think every bit as far as defense is concerned is important, but we must remember that over the last decade, a lot of indigenization has taken place and our dependency to a very large extent has reduced on foreign supplies. And that goes especially for the Indian Navy also. So while the legacy equipment is there and we will still be dependent upon Ukraine and on Russia for certain supplies for the Air Force, for the Navy, and also for the Army, I don't think the criticality is there to the extent which it was earlier. However, if peace comes into, if you finally have peace between Russia and Ukraine,
Yes.
then the situation will certainly improve. But should they continue to fight, I think we will carry on. It is not critical to India, but it is important to India. Let me put it that way.
It's not.
And so, to that extent, I think India will be looking for a peaceful solution, or at least a ceasefire to take place. And while there may be outward hostility, but at least the guns won't be firing. And to that extent, I think if we can work towards that, that should be all right for us.
Right.
But regardless of anything, I think our defense capability, we have looked after it. So that won't matter to the extent it would have about a decade ago.
Right, absolutely. And the guns need to stop firing, General Katoch, as you mentioned. Aditya, that ceasefire that you mentioned during that very historic airlift of Indian students, is there any possibility that, is it even being discussed on the table, the fact that India could be an honest broker between Ukraine and Russia? Has that been raised by the MEA in the last couple of weeks?
If India says this,
Yeah.
if New Delhi takes that position, then one would say that India is trying to become a world leader, and
Right.
Prime Minister Modi is perhaps going for a Nobel Peace Prize. But it is the Ukrainian ambassador.
Yes.
In fact, Ukrainian ambassador in the media has said
Right.
that Modi and India, as the leader of the global South,
Yeah.
can play a very significant and predominantly important role
Right.
in brokering peace. So this is a reality. I would give you an example that we spoke last year during the G20. In the days to the G20, it was increasingly unlikely, especially from the Western
Yes.
press and foreign policy wonks, that there would be no consensus.
Right.
And even though diplomacy does not matter so much when there is an active war
Yes.
taking place, but it was significant.
Right.
The joint statement, the consensus on Ukraine and Russia was significant, and that happened in New Delhi. So Prime Minister Modi, with the way he has positioned himself
Right.
and India, and Jaishankar's foreign policy approach and direct speak
Yes.
is quite significant. And as you mentioned, apart from this, there is a whole lot of bandwidth of bilateral ties
Yes.
that are going to be discussed in the defense sector. The JV in gas turbines of the Indian
Yes,
Navy,
yes.
gas turbine engines, is
Right.
a significant step forward.
Absolutely.
And perhaps we'll see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. The joint venture with Zoria Mash Project, as it's pronounced, the Ukrainian company that powers like literally 90% of the Indian Navy's frontline destroyers and frigates. It's a very large number. So I'm sure a joint venture like this with that Ukrainian company would, alleviate our fears of a cut if there is, if the war spreads, if, it could possibly disrupt these supplies to our warships, naval warships, critical warships. This is, obviously they didn't think of this contingency at the time when these deals were signed back then in the 90s.
True.
That, you would be looking at a full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine. But General Katoch, when this visit was doing the rounds, with talks of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine were doing the rounds, the Russia-Ukraine war was kind of on a slow burn. It wasn't the kind that's in the last couple of hours, what has happened, or last couple of days, Aditya. Ukraine has launched a full-scale offensive into Kursk. That's Russian territory. They've captured over 400 kilometers. They've captured a lot of Russian prisoners who they want to exchange for in case there is ceasefire talks. And you have Russia pushing ahead in the Donbas region. And today you have a massive, massive drone strike that the Ukrainians have launched, over 40 drones against Russian territory. This points to an escalation of the conflict itself. Do you think that the timing of this visit, Prime Minister Modi's visit, when he lands in Kiev, well, he actually rolls into Kiev in that railway line.
Yes.
I mean, the
Rail Force One.
Rail Force One as he's taking. When he drives into Kiev in that railway engine, do you think that kind of takes away from a lot of, the sensitivity of this visit? The fact that you have a full-scale war that's going on. It's not just what it was on the back burner a few days back. Today it's like, you have Ukrainian forces fighting on the territory of Russia. You have, of course, Russia pushing deep into Donbas, and there are cruise missile strikes, drone strikes, all of that. points to an escalation in the conflict. How do state visits usually take place when there are full-scale wars of the kind that we've been seeing in the last couple of days? Tell our viewers this.
Russians were attacking earlier, and Ukraine was actually on the defensive.
Yes.
And there was, I thought there was some sort of an explicit understanding or a thought process within the Russian armed forces that
Right.
Ukraine will never attack Russian territory.
Yes.
And should they do so, it'll be treated as tremendous escalation.
Right.
I think the Russians are tired also now, and
Yes.
the Ukrainians wanted to say, listen, we can actually hit Russia also, and if
Right.
required, we will do so. Now, this is the larger danger here is not between what is going to happen between Russia and Ukraine. It is really, will the conflict spread across to NATO? And then, of course, we don't know which way it will go. I think over a long term, the Ukrainians will not be able to sustain what they are doing. Capturing territory and getting into a place is relatively easy. Sticking on there and holding on to it is a very, very difficult task. That is what the Russians have experienced also. I was quite certain that if Russia wishes to capture Ukraine, they could have captured the whole territory. They couldn't have held on to it. And now I'm realizing that even the portion which they have captured, largely it is Russian-speaking people who the entire belt which they have got is Russian-speaking, and the rest have been pushed out. So they have a population base there which is supportive of them. But when you're looking at Ukraine's entry into the Kursk area, the population is not supportive as far as Ukraine is concerned, and they are going to have problems in the long term, or even in the short term, I will say. But it is a good bargaining chip. So now the Ukrainians can tell the Russians, listen, we want back something, we'll give you something, and there will be some sort of, it is possible that you can have a compromise. The Russians are not going to cede everything, but I think they will cede much more now than what they would have ceded earlier. So to that extent, I think what the Ukrainians have did, that is the way their thought process has gone. For the Russians, I think they can still save face and have a compromise and retain a large part of what they have captured. And we are in a position to get onto a truce. But ultimately, it will also depend upon what the United States thinks, what not NATO thinks, and if the US wants to continue to progress the war.
Yes.
There was a chance of a ceasefire even 2 years back, but Britain actually dissuaded Ukraine from doing so.
Yes.
So that would have been, of course, on US instructions. So there was a larger game plan being played on Ukrainian territory by Western forces. I think even the West is tired now. So perhaps we can come to some sort of an arrangement. And despite the fact that this offensive has gone in now,
Yes.
I think it is the right time for the Indian Prime Minister to be there and be in a position to talk to both sides.
Absolutely. The timing of this visit, very interesting as put by General Katoch, the fact that Prime Minister Modi lands at a time when both sides have been fighting for 3.5 years now without a respite. And who knows, this could be the start of a new peace process in Ukraine, a permanent ceasefire. Who knows what could transpire in the next couple of hours, but that's a story we'll be watching very carefully. Prime Minister Modi's mission Ukraine. Thank you for joining us, General Katoch. My colleague Aditya Raj called. That's a story that's on everyone's radar as Prime Minister Modi drives into Kyiv over the next couple of hours. Dalit tribal organizations have called for a 14-hour Bharat Bandh today against the Supreme Court's decision to exclude the scheduled caste from creamy layer reservations. Now, caste is clearly the BJP's Achilles heel in 2024. In the Lok Sabha elections in UP, the BJP lost nearly 29 seats, partly because a Congress SP rumor began doing the rounds that the BJP would end reservations. On the 20th of August, the union government withdrew a UPSC advertisement calling for 45 lateral entry positions into the IAS because the opposition said no reservations had been announced. Now, there are elections this year in 4 states, Maharashtra, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, and Jharkhand, and of course Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir being a union territory. The Supreme Court has made valid observations on the benefits of reservations going to a select few. Then why has the BJP not been able to counter this false narrative that the opposition has been spreading? And also, are we seeing a Mandal agitation 2.0 building up? What can and what should the government do? What is the BJP thinking? Joining me to discuss this are Mr. P.K. Malhotra, former Law Secretary to the Government of India, Mr. Bhanuchandra Nagarajan, Policy Advisor and Political Analyst, and in the studio at News9 Plus here with me is my colleague Ashok Bagadia. Ashok, BJP is walking into a caste minefield, you think, in 2024? You know, minefield is something where you don't see the mines, right? But you know there's a minefield out there, so you tread with caution. How do you cross a minefield? Tread with caution.
This is a really dense minefield if
Yes.
you were to look at it. And the best thing politically is to avoid it.
Right.
You cannot get into a minefield and start diffusing those
Yes,
trigger points.
absolutely.
So as far as the Bharatiya Janata Party and this caste controversy that has been brewing since April 2024, because it was in April that the Congress and the Samajwadi Party came up with a narrative that the BJP wants to secure 400 seats in the
Yes.
Lok Sabha elections, primarily with the idea to change the constitution and do away with the reservation policy, which is enshrined and integrally a part of the Constitution of India. Now, that did create a kind of a scare psychosis amongst the voters, especially from the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and even the OBCs, because what we witnessed in some constituency was a very humbling defeat for the Bharatiya Janata Party.
Absolutely.
Let's actually even take the case of Ayodhya.
Yes.
Ayodhya is one particular seat where the OBCs voted against the Bharatiya Janata Party en masse, and the BJP was, forget any other seats, the BJP was so assured that if we can lose anything, but we will never lose Ayodhya. But
Right.
there they had to eat a humble pie.
Yes.
Now, this controversy was triggered then. Now, what has added more fuel to the fire
Yes.
is this August 1st judgment of the Supreme Court of India, where the Supreme Court was called on to
Right.
decide a very tricky question, whether there can be some communities within the scheduled caste which can be given preference in reservations, and this was a move. There was a law made by the Punjab government. So the Supreme Court was called to answer that. The Supreme Court ruled and said yes, affirmatively, that it can be done. But it did not stop there. 4 of the 7 judges who were part of the bench said, look, it is time that we have this idea or the concept of creamy layer, which the Supreme Court evolved in the Indira Sahni case, should be imported even to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe reservations, and the communities and castes who were benefiting from it should be excluded from the fold of reservations.
Right, absolutely, and that's a landmark judgment, given how sensitive the caste issue has been, and clearly that explains why the government has gone slow on that. But Mr. Malhotra, I want to ask you this question: why has the government put this very contentious issue of the creamy layer on the back burner? What are the issues of implementing this? This was meant to be a state-by-state implementation. Ashok, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But they've kind of gone on the back foot on this one. Mr. Malhotra, tell us what the government is thinking when it put this whole issue on the back burner. How long can it keep doing this?
Thank you, Sandeep, for inviting me in this very important discussion, because today Bharat Bandh has also been called on this particular issue, on which the Supreme Court has given its judgment and laid down certain new norms which are not existing as on today, either in the policy of the government or in the constitution. Now, all of us understand that this age-old caste system in India is responsible for the origination of the reservation system in our country. And this reservation system is governed by the policies of the government as well as by provision of the constitution. And the historical injustice which has been done to some class, some castes, that was incorporated, and the constitution framers were, I think, wise enough to make a specific provision of the constitution and leaving the detail of it to the government as to how best it should be done. Any political party, including the parties in power today, have used and exploited this particular system for the purposes of their vote bank. I'll not go into that issue, but I'll be confining myself only to the policies of the government. and the developments which have taken place right from independence time to date. On different occasions, right from 1951, the Supreme Court has given various judgments. Ashok was mentioning about the Indira Sani judgment,
Yes.
which I think was a landmark judgment in which the socially and economically backward sections of the society were also given recognition in relation to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, and reservation was made for them also. And later on also in 2002 also the Supreme Court has given a judgment, in 2022, the Supreme Court has given a judgment whereby they have said that the reservation system is in existence for the last 75 years. Time has come when we should review it, whether it should continue in the same form or a different form need to be adopted. In addition to that, by way of an amendment in the Constitution, the socially and economically backward sections of the society were given 10% reservation, which again became a subject matter of challenge, and the Supreme Court has given a verdict on that. And while giving that verdict by a decision of 6-1 in the latest judgment given on 1st of August, Supreme Court has said that certain sections of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes who are enjoying the benefits of this particular reservation, and they have enjoyed it for a longer time.
Yes.
There are
Yes.
there are people within that caste and that society probably who have not been given that kind of benefit, and today the benefit is being extended only to those who have already taken advantage of this particular benefit reservation. So I think in that context, the Supreme Court judgment is looking at the reservation from a progressive angle.
Yes.
The fact remains, when the provision was originally made in the Constitution, the reservation was only for 10 years.
Right.
After that, every 10 years, it has been extended by way of an amendment in the Constitution. Therefore, the development which have taken place from 1950 to date, changing the scenario of reservation as to how it should be done, for whom it should be done. Many time amendments have been made for political consideration. We know it, all political parties have done it. Take, for example, the reservation in promotion,
Yes.
which was not the original concept. But by way of policy, the government amended the Constitution because the Supreme Court has not supported it. They amended the Constitution and made reservation. Even with regard to socially and economically backward society, section of the society, in 1992, in Indira Gandhi's case, Indira Sani's case, it was said that this reservation can be done. But then the Constitution was amended and the amendment has been made, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court now. So taking that scenario, I think this is an evolving process. And in the social and economic changes in the Indian structure and Indian society which has taken place, I think this dynamism has to come.
Right.
And a time has come when the system should be reviewed. Government came out with the policy of lateral entry. This is not a new concept.
Not at all.
Lateral entry has been there in
It's been there from the 1950s. Yeah, but that's a question. I'm going to bring in Bhanuchandra Nagarajan on this. Bhanuchandra, there are a lot of these decisions were taken in the time of the second term of the Modi government as well, like lateral entry, for instance. They went ahead with it in 2018. There was no opposition, so to speak. But now, you think the government has become extra cautious? It's like treading on eggshells, literally crossing a minefield. Every time there's a caste question that comes up, it exits the minefield. It doesn't even contest it. There have been number of instances that I just mentioned. And while the Supreme Court is correct in what it said, it's a progressive question that they've raised. Now is not the time for caste questions, to reframe one of Prime Minister Modi's statements on the war in Ukraine, right? This is something that you don't want to touch at this moment, given how sensitive the political equations are, especially with your allies. You need them for your support. Is this what Modi 3.0 is going to look like, Bhanuchandra, from now to 2029?
See, in the last few weeks, you can see all the three pillars of our democratic republic acting out, and it is you see the churning there.
Yes.
The Supreme Court perhaps felt that the current scheme of things is producing its own winners and losers, and there are certain communities, for example, say the Valmiki community, which was mentioned, which have not been able to reap the benefits of the current system. So it suggested a few tweakings. A point that a couple of the speakers missed was, there are two parts to this. One is an observation and second is a judgment. The creamy layer bit is an observation. Okay.
Yes.
So, and after the observation was made, the SC, ST MPs of the parliament went to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister said that this is not part of a judgment, so we are not going to do anything about it.
Right.
The second part is the one which said that the state governments can do subcategorization, but they also impose boundary conditions, right? They said that
Right.
you cannot have 100% of caste in a particular thing, and also you have to have quantitative basis on what you're doing. So I think we see that all the three pillars of our democratic republic are working, and it's good to see the Supreme Court taking an initiative here, because it perhaps felt that the current political system, it's very hard for political parties to take up social justice issues,
Yes.
right? Because there are so many players, and it's a coalition government. So coming to the bit that you're asking, Sandeep, is that, see, regarding the lateral business, I think perhaps the government is like willing to lose a few battles to win the big war. If you look at the Prime Minister's Independence Day speech, he spoke about one nation, one election in
Yes.
the common civil code, which is now the secular civil
Right.
code. So he perhaps wants to preserve political capital to execute those. And this was just 45 appointments that were supposed to be made to lateral entries. Withdrawing that perhaps was a smaller loss that.
Absolutely. Win, skirt all the minor battles, but, look at the big war. But the war being, as Bhanuchandra mentioned, the Uniform Civil Code, which has now been rebranded, and of course the one nation, one election. But, when it comes back to caste, Ashok, it's such an inalienable part of our political discourse. Now, given the fact that you have so many state elections, literally you have a roller coaster of state elections from now right up to 2029, where is this caste equation going to be in this whole thing? You think it's going to be what you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion? Stay away from the minefield, don't even go there. Let things go as they've been proceeding.
Look, it will be very difficult for the Bharatiya Janata Party to entirely keep away from the controversy.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what you're really looking at is you're trying to win elections.
Yes.
And when you're winning elections, you are looking at the vote share or the number of people who are casting votes for your particular party.
Right.
Now, everybody is for a long time being shying away from doing a caste census.
Yes.
It's time, actually, the country needs to know that what exactly is the composition of the castes within the country.
Right.
How many upper castes are there, how many other castes are there, how many scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. And if you look at it, probably everybody at the back of their mind knows that the number of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and OBCs has over the last few decades risen phenomenally,
right.
and they have a big say in who wins the election. So, as you rightly pointed out, that in the next, in the coming months, there are at least 4 assembly elections that we are looking at. Then we have Delhi elections, then we have Bihar elections, then subsequently elections in the southern states, where again caste plays a very important factor, because these are the people, these are the voters who are going to vote for you. Now, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the biggest challenge for Bharatiya Janata Party is to create a parallel narrative. Either they can build a parallel narrative on their position as far as the castes are concerned, or reservations or affirmative action is concerned, or probably go on the defensive and tell the members of these castes and community who enjoy the benefits of affirmative action that even if Bharatiya Janata Party comes to power, nothing will happen to the reservation policy, which is an inherent part of the constitution. So, the Bharatiya Janata Party will have to go back to the drawing board, decide what is the strategy that they have to adopt in the days
Absolutely.
to come.
You hit the nail on the head with that, Ashok. The fact that you remember back in 1989 when the BJP stepped on the temple, stepped up the pressure on the temple movement because the Mandal agitation had begun, and they had to balance Mandal with Kamandal, as they called it. But and it's back to that in 2024, because if you look at it from the party's point of view, the Ram Mandir has not delivered the kind of dividends that they wanted to, and they're clearly looking at something that you want to get a lot of, win a lot of elections with. You need that one big issue. And what is it going to be? Is it going to be a caste census? One really doesn't know. But the fact is that, as Ashok pointed out, that the BJP is going to be looking at creating a new narrative to balance this minefield that they're faced with, the caste minefield that the opposition has laid out for them in the months ahead. And of course, in the last couple of days, that minefield has been playing heavily on the minds of the party, the BJP, as it heads into elections. But I want to thank my co-panelists, Bhanuchandra Nagarajan, Mr. Malhotra, and Ashok Bagaria for joining us on this discussion on the BJP 3.0's caste minefield.